Hey guys, it's David from 3D Make It. Today we're going to be talking about the BLtouch and how to get it set up on your SKR 1.3 or the SKR E3 Mini. Let's go! So before we get started on the boards, let's just define what the BLtouch is. Well, it's an auto-level sensor for your 3D printer. Basically, it deploys a probe, blunk, probe touches the bed, bunk, goes up, knows where the bed is, and we make a mesh. So the BLtouch looks like this on my Ender 3. I use it on my SX4 as well. And basically I have a version 3.1 and a 2. The 3.1's on the Ender, the 2 is on the SX4. When you first get your BLtouch, you're going to notice a couple things. One, the BLtouch comes with DuPont ends on it, and the one end has 3 wires and the one end has 2. So just talking about the BLtouch still, what does that all mean? Well, let's jump over to the BLtouch website and figure out exactly what this wiring does for us. So if you're on the BLtouch website, it's an important place to start. Just come down to the BLtouch and select your version. Now, probably most of us will be buying the 3.1, but there's might be a few version 3s out there still, but we're going to pick version 3.1. So if we come down onto the page, we want to learn a little bit about the wiring. So we keep scrolling down and down and down and down and down and down and down. And it's going to be about 2/3 down the page, and you're going to be like, why isn't there a picture with colored wires? I asked myself the same thing. So here's a picture of the probe, and here's a picture of how to get everything sort of set up. So it gives you your trigger distances and different measurements if you wanted to make a mount. But we're after the wiring. So the wiring is actually in this lovely table right here. So if we look, the brown wire coming off the BLtouch is ground. The red is 5 volt and the orange is a control signal. So that's important to remember. In a bit we're going to keep this page up, but remember to find this information, it is on the BLtouch website. It's under your version and you scroll about 2/3 the way down the page. So just to reiterate, we've got a brown, a red, and an orange. Sometimes they look yellow, but you can see they're all into a DuPont end here. And we have another pair. We have a black and a white pair. So if we bounce back to the web page, we can see that the black is ground and the white is the Z-Min switch. So that's exactly what we're going to plug into. So we're going to plug in our BLtouch into our end stop on the board when we get there. And then we need to know which cable basically is ground, which is the brown, red is the 5 volt, and orange is the control. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about the BLtouch, let's talk about the boards that everybody has been using, and we've been getting a lot of questions on how to get the BLtouch working on, and that's the SKR series boards. So the first place we're going to look is we're just going to bounce over and talk about the SKR 1.3, and then we're going to talk about the SKR Mini E3. So to do that, we're just going to bounce over here to the website. Now we're going to go to the Big Tree Tech GitHub. So if you've never been before, it's github.com/bigtreetech. So this is the place you want to come for all information related to those boards. So we're going to open up the 1.3, and I have it open in another tab here. We're going to scroll down, and we're actually going to go into the 1.3, but it's kind of cool to note that the 1.4 is now out. So if you want to do it with the 1.4 too, you can come and follow these instructions, but just click 1.4. So we're going to click the Big Tree Tech 1.3. So that brings us into the SKR 1.3 folder. And then what we're actually going to do is we're going to click this PDF here. So this one is the Big Tree Tech 1.3 guide PDF. Now, it'll load on the page. You can download it if you want. I'm just going to leave it loaded on the page. So there's a lot of preamble and what to do with the SKR board, and we're going to get there. So we're just going to scroll down past all of this information, because what we're worried about right now is wiring that BLtouch into the board. So remember we were talking about wiring not too long ago. Well, Big Tree Tech has given us a diagram. So if you look here, we have circled and highlighted in red here, and that one's going to be the servo pins, and the polarity of the pins, or the pin out, is going to be 5-volt, ground, and our control pin. So you can see here they've even labeled our wires. Remember, the 5-volt was actually ground, so the red has to go on the outside. The brown one has to be ground, so it goes on the inside pin. And the other one, the control pin, goes on the right-hand side. So you're going to have to take apart that DuPont cable, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And it's not hard to do. But remember, when we're plugging the BLtouch into our servo pins, we're going to be looking at our 5-volt on the left, our ground in the middle, and our 2 or our control is on the right-hand side. All right, now the other thing we're going to have to plug in is our lovely 2-port DuPont cable there, and that's our switch. So we're going to take that one into our Z minus, so that's the Z minus limit switch, or Z for Canadian folk. But when we come in here, remember the white one, so that white cable needs to go to our voltage, so that comes down here. And then the ground one goes into the middle. Now, even though there is a 1.25 on this port, it is not carrying voltage. So the white one goes to the bottom, and then the black one goes to the middle of that switch. If you look at the board, the physical board, you will notice that the voltage, ground, and the switch are labeled there. So you don't have to worry about remembering this document, but you do have to remember that black is ground and then the white cable is just the switch. Alright, so we've talked about our good friend SKR 1.3 and wiring. So let's jump to the E3 Mini and see what's different. So same thing, we start on the Big Tree Tech GitHub. Instead of the SKR 1.3, we've actually clicked the E3 Mini. So you can see here's our breadcrumbs, or our crow feet at the top there. This one's a little different. They didn't structure them the same. So when you get into the GitHub, you're going to go hardware, and you're going to pick 1.2 for most of us, the newer board. And then once you go in there, this one's yet again separated differently, so there's no manual per se, but there is a pin guide. So we're going to click that pin guide, and it will load us to the same image. So we can see here, this time they haven't circled any of the BLtouch information, but that's okay. So if you look down here at servos, right where I just right-clicked, that's where we're going to be plugging it in, and that exists on the board right here, servos. So the servos on this one goes ground, 5-volt, and then control. So that's brown, and then red, and then control. So the yellow, or orange, sorry. And that one's going to get you a little bit different wiring. And again, you're going to want to make sure that you check your BLtouch cable, because the wiring could be different depending on what you set up. If we just take a quick peek at this picture again, we can see that the regular cable is brown, red, orange. So in this case, we have our servo down here, brown, red, orange. It's going to be fine. Just make sure you put the brown side on the left when you're plugging everything into the board. And again, we're going to use that black white into our ground and switch cables on the Z-limit switches. So if you're looking for your Z-limit switches, you can either come here and look, or you can go right onto the board. They're easy to find. I don't think we need to go too much into them. But if we're in need of, we can use this document. So again, both boards for the limit switch are the same. It's just the pinout that changes, and this is the biggest thing that gets people. You have to be very careful that when you're using those boards that you get the right pinout. So make sure you look at the board diagram or on the physical board most times, and it will tell you which pin is ground, which one is for your voltage, and which one is the control. You need to get all of those in the right order. If you don't, your BLtouch could enter an alarm mode, or maybe it just gets stuck on blue, stuck on red, or doesn't turn on, period. And that's the number one common error that's made, is the wiring needs to be changed on those DuPont ends. So here's just a little DuPont end, and you can see that there's a little silver part right at the tip. Behind that there is a sleeve, so if you can get your nippers out and you just get it under the sleeve, you pull up a bit and you pull back on the cable, the DuPont end releases, and then you can switch spots with whatever you need to match your needs. Now it's important to note that if you actually wreck that little tab on this, don't worry. The BLtouch Genuine Kit actually comes with an extra 3-port and 2-port DuPont connector, so you can just rehook everything up. Life's good. And then when you're ready, you just want to make sure that the tabbed part, the winged part of your DuPont is facing up, and that the hole in the end here just slides back on, and then you'll match the top flap to the clasp, push down, and your DuPont cable is ready to go again. Alright, and the next thing we're going to do is actually talk firmware. So let's jump on over to Marlin's webpage there. And when we get into Marlin, we're just going to hit the download button here on the marlinfw.org. If you forget from the last video, go check it out. We're just going to download the 2.0 zip, which will download in the bottom there. We'll close that off, and that's ready to go. We already have VSCODE and Platform IO set up, and we did that in another video. So if you haven't followed along with that, go check that one out. Alright, so we got our Marlin. We're just going to extract the firmware like we did in the last video. When the window pops up here, just click extract and life will be good. It'll take a second and it'll go through and we'll have it done. So just while that's extracting, I just want to throw it out there. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Probably you do. Marlin 2.0 is a release candidate now. So if you pop over to the Marlin firmware page on the download, you'll see the latest release is 2.0x. So this is kind of misleading. This is the release candidate, but if you scroll down, they're still in nightly builds with bug fixes, and they did this right back to 1.19. So even though it's in release candidate and that is the stable version, there may be bugs or something on your board specifically that doesn't work and you need to go in and grab the bug fix. It's still safe to grab the bug fix, but we're going to be dealing with the release candidate in this video. So one of our viewers and subscribers here has asked if we could do an Ender 3 specific video, and I say yes. We're going to be doing it for both the SKR 1.3 and the E3 Mini, and you'll see why it's that easy in a second. But let's jump into our Marlin folder there that we just extracted, and we're going to go into Marlin. We're going to go config, examples, and Creality, and in the Creality folder we are going to find our example files. This is the best place to start so you don't have to start right from scratch, although there's some things that are going to be a little bit off that we're going to fix, but for the most part it's a good place to start. And then we're just going to go back through the folders till we get to Marlin again, and then we're going to go into Marlin and then we paste. So that's a lot of Marlin, and if you didn't follow through with that, you can watch our other video and we go through it a little bit more in depth. So now that we have our example files in the Marlin folder, we can open our VS Code. And we're just going to go open project. We're going to go to where we saved and extracted that firmware that we were using. So for me, I just put it in a folder on the C drive. You probably put it somewhere else. So just go to the folder that you just made, go into the first Marlin. So that's firmware, Marlin, and then we're just going to go Marlin. And go to the folder that has the platform ini, and then you're just going to hit open. So it'll chug away for a second. It opens an untitled workspace, which is normal. Don't panic if you see errors on load. Remember, it's loading the whole project, so it might take it a second to parse through all the files to actually know that they're there. But now that we're in here, I'm just going to close that landing page there. We're going to open Marlin and we're going to go to configuration.h. So you can see here right now it says no problems. It might pop up with some problems, but they will go away. So we're just going to shrink this terminal window down a bit. So as we go through, there's just a few things we're going to change in this file, and one would be the board type. So if you scroll down, mostly it's the same. But when you get to the board type, so that's going to be down right here. So the motherboard definition, and it says board Melzi right now, and we need to change that. So if we go into our source and our core files, we'll find boards.h. So remember, that's just in the Marlin folder, source, core, and then boards.h. So let's open that. And what will happen is we get into the boards file. Let's just search for big. So we can see here we have Big Tree Tech boards that pop up. Here's the SKR version 1.1. Don't want to add lines in there. And then we can keep going down until we find the minis. And here we are in the mini section. So we're specifically going to be dealing with the 1.2. So here's the 1.2. And I copy everything right up to the word board. So board to the end. And then we just come back into configuration H. And then we're just going to hover over this board that's there right now and paste. So sweet, we did that. There's one more step and we have to make sure we do it. We have to set our stereo ports at the top. It's always good to double check those. If you're not sure, you can pop back into the Big Tree Tech and then you can come down to the 1.3 board here. And now if we go back into the main E3 page, we can actually go into the firmware, into the 1.2, and then we can go into the Marlin release for it. Now I'm not sure if this is the current release of Marlin, like the release candidate. It doesn't look like it because it says it's 22 days old and in some cases a couple months there. So we're just going to open configuration.h right on this page, and then we can scroll down and you can actually double check your serial, your board name, that kind of stuff. So you can see here we need to define serial port as 2 and -1. So serial port and then serial port under 2 is -1. So if we come in here, we got 2, and then we just got to uncomment those few lines. I'm going to hit save just to bring it up to date. So now we're pretty close. If you wanted to, you could check the baud rate, but we should be okay at 1152, which we are. We have the board name here, and you can see that we've already found that and it matched, which is good. We can change the name if we want. We can go through and edit the config, set extruders, that kind of thing. One thing you want to kind of make note of is that the bed size is correct. Remember, the Ender has a 235 by 235, so some in the old examples they didn't have that, but now they do, so we're good to go. Now pretty much we're set up for an Ender, except we have to go down and we're going to go do a search for TMC 2209 because we have 2209s in the E3 Mini. We just have to make sure we define those as steppers. So if we go to line 668 starting on, we can copy that TMC 2209. And remember, 2209s drive the opposite direction of your regular steppers. So on the Ender, we'll have an X, and remember to uncomment, a Y, and a Z. And then we also have our E0. And that's going to be also a 2209. So I'm just going to save that. Now, we want to make sure that the direction of the stepper is correct. So if we scroll, actually, we're just going to do a search, and we're going to go search for dir. So here, if we just do a quick search, we can see that we get true, true, false, true for our invert X, Y, Z, and E dir. So you're going to want to switch those. Because the 2209s do drive differently than the A4988s in there. So this should be false. So I'm just going to copy false here. And I like being lazy. This should be true here. And then the last one should be false. So we switched them. So the X, we switched to false. The Y, we switched to false. The Z is now true. And then if we go down to the extruder, it's false. So we should be okay. We flipped them. So let's hit save. Now we're almost there actually for configuration of the board. It's not far away. There is one more thing that we do have to make sure we check just to set up the board, and that's in config.h, advanced.h, sorry, and we're just going to look for trinamic, and we can come down and just scroll down until we find our 2208 section, which is just the next one after the first. So we end up on line 1862. And if has trinamic is true, it will enable our XYZ. And right now you can see that they've overridden the currents to 580, 580, 580, 580, and 580. So just look at if axis Z has trinamic 580. Now you can see that my IntelliSense hasn't caught up, so stuff is still grayed out here, and I'm okay with that. It will catch up eventually. But if you're impatient, you can try to close the project and reopen it, and it should reparse the file. So we have is trinamic, has trinamic. It looks like everything's okay. One thing with the 2209s though is you could actually run them a little cooler. You could run them at 550 or maybe even down to 500. I have mine at 550 and they are working fantastically. So that's pretty much the last step to set up the trinamic drivers. Now, once we have that done, we do have to set one more thing. So if I open this platform ini, you can see right now that it's going to be loading the mega, which is not quite right. We can type over top of it, and we can actually type BTT, and hopefully we come up with the right board, but it doesn't look like we did. So let's just do a quick search for big. And you can see here that it gives us our environment right here. So big tree tech, wow, that's a tongue twister. And we want to just set it to big tree tech, the SM32 one, just because we're using the mini board. So we'll scroll back up into that environment path, and we will change that board. So it's right here. I'm going to hit save. So now all of that's done. Our basic configuration should be complete. If we fire that build with the little check mark box at the bottom, the panel will spin up and we'll see what we get. Success! We've made it. It has built, and it only took 3 minutes and 2 seconds. That's speed. So when you look, we have a success on the board that we chose, which is awesome. We're ready to compile, throw it on the board if we want. Just move the hex file over or plug it in, and we can use the upload arrow. Now, I want to show you one more thing before we talk BLtouch. Remember how I said it was very, very easy to switch between boards? Well, it is. All we have to do now, since we're configured for 2209s, is if we have an SKR 1.3 and we're using 2209s, we can actually just change the board. So if we go back up here, we have our serial port set right now. We'll come back to that. So we just have to change this motherboard. So if I go back into my source, my core, and my boards, we can find big tree again. Let's just look up the word big. There we go. So we want to talk the big tree tech SKR 1.3. So there's the 1.1, and we'll get there. 1.3 right here. So again, I'm just going to copy everything to the board. Go configuration, and I could replace the board here. And then I could also replace the board in my platform INO file with the LPC 1768. So if I just type in LPC 1768, it's right there. Now the reason I know this is because I've done it a few times. But if you haven't, you can always go back and check the resource page. So if we go to the Big Tree Tech 1.3, and I'm just going to go right to the top of this page. I'm going to come back out just into the main folder, and if I go 1.3 firmware bug fix, so here's all the files. So if I wanted to check the board type and the platform INO, I could, and there's the LPC 1768. So I can read these files just as a quick example, because this, remember, this one looks more up to date. It looks 4 days ago, so this might be the release candidate, but the other one definitely was not yet. It was a few months out. So knowing that it's the 1768 and that, the only other thing actually we should check is our ports. Remember how we set the ports to -1 and 2? Well, we just want to check and make sure that our board would match. So if we're doing a 1.3 board, we can come down and use port 0 and -1. And remember, when we were doing our mini board, it was -1 and 2. So it is different, but not too different. We just got to make sure we get the right information from the GitHub. So I'm just going to take out this Big Tree Tech board here, which will set it back to what we had. And then I'm also going to go into my Platform Mini and just grab the same board I had, because I don't want to wait 3 more minutes to compile a different board. All right, we have the Ender 3. We just need the BLtouch. So let's go into the config.h file. We're going to look for BLtouch. And it's right there. So it gives you a definition of what the BLtouch is. If you scroll up a bit, it gets into the probe section, which is really where we need to start. So on line 807 in the probe section, we just want to make sure define z-min probe uses z-min end stop pin. Even though you do have a port on the SKR boards for the actual trigger switch for the BLtouch, you do still want to use that minimum switch. It works better. I'm not sure why. It's probably just a board configuration issue. So just make sure that guy is uncommented, which it should be if you use the example files for your printer. And if you didn't, well, just make sure it's uncommented. So we're just going to scroll down, and then we're going to find BLtouch. And then we erase the comment. That enables the BLtouch. So we just scroll down a bit more. So just to be clear, the BLtouch is on line 871. So we're going to scroll down a bit more, and it gives us this neato chart, and it starts on line 909, and what it tells us is basically how to figure out the probe offset. So your probe offset is going to be where your probe is versus your nozzle. So basically, if you take a ruler and you measure, and your nozzle ends up to the right side, so over here of your your probe ends up to the right side of your nozzle, you're going to add numbers. If it's to the left side, you're going to take away numbers. If it's in front, you minus numbers, and if it's in the back, you add numbers. That's all awesome. But what it really means is, since we use this default configuration example, we have kind of a default already set up at 10, 10, and 0. So if we read this number correctly, that would be the probe is 10. So the probe is actually to the right hand side of the nozzle, and the 10 would mean it's in front of the nozzle. So if we look at my config very quickly, you can see that the BLtouch probe is actually to the left hand side of my nozzle. So in my case, I'd want to measure, and then I'd end up with a negative number. You can actually pull that out of your config if you want, if you knew it before, or measure. So we're just going to go -30 because, well, that's what it is. And then my Y is pretty close to 0. It's sitting fairly even. We can go back and adjust this and measure if we need to. And then the Z, generally you leave as 0 because you're going to figure that out in baby stepping or other methods after. And we're going to have a whole video on figuring that out. Probe min edges, which means the distance from the probe to the side of the bed, just leave that at 10. It's fine. Speed rate is okay. This is just how fast your probe will actually touch the bed, which is the standard one's not terrible, and you don't want to crash your nozzle anyway. You can leave all of the clearance stuff alone. It usually works just fine. Now we do want to talk about our bed leveling methods. So if I look up the word mesh, mesh, I'll get there, guys. Mesh, I can spell. So you can see here that I found the leveling section just by using the word mesh. If you know any of the bilinear or 3-point leveling, it's in bed leveling sections. So pick your favorite search term. That's the quickest way to get around in Marlin. So on a line, it starts at line 1132, but we're going to talk about really enabling one of these methods for our probe, and we're going to use mesh. Actually, no, that's a lie. We're going to use bilinear. So we're just going to remove that bilinear, and it gives you a description up here. So the probes, it probes several parts in a grid. You specify the rectangle, and it stores it in a mesh. So we're just going to uncomment that auto bed leveling bilinear. That's a tongue twister too. So once that's enabled, you can see there's some other things below that get enabled. And for the most part, we can actually leave this as is. Since we haven't saved, the IntelliSense hasn't caught up, so we could close the project again and open it. But I don't want to. I'm a busy person. Let's get through this. So if either bed linear leveling or bilinear is on, you can define your points. On an ender, it's a small printer. 3 touch points by 3 touch points gives you 9 points in total, which is perfect. If you have a printer that's bigger, so let's say 300 millimeters, so into that CR10S or artillery size, up to something big like a Chiron or an SX4 size, you're going to want to use 5 points. 5 points gives you a more accurate measure of your bed level, and you'll actually find your prints a little bit better. So we're going to leave it as 3, and that's line 1217. But if you do have a bigger bed, bump that number up. So for the most part, we've configured our board successfully for the BLtouch. It's ready to be plugged in. And remember, we talked about the wiring earlier. So just match up those wires to the right color and port on the board. Brown is your ground, red is the 5 volt. And your orange yellowish, I guess, would be your control. And the black goes to the center of the Z min stop. Once you get all that set up, it's not that hard. So go back to the beginning of the video, just check out that wiring section again, get everything plugged in, throw the firmware on. Then once you're ready to go and your BLtouch is on, you just have to make sure that you do a very, very quick calibration to see where your Z offset is. And remember, you can do that from the menu on your Ender 3s, or you can do it from a web interface like Octoprint, or anything really you can baby step from. The one last thing that we'll talk about is just in the advanced configuration again. And we did go through and turn all the Trinamic stuff on, but if you want reporting, you have to go through the Trinamic section and turn some of that on. So if you've bought your chips in UART, you can do some reporting, you can change the voltages on the fly. If you haven't bought the chip in UART, then ignore this, you can't get reports. So if you go down here and you can say if enabled, so this is where we want to do our monitoring status. So M122, all the stuff relevant to our steppers are down here. So if it's in UART, so you have a 2209 in UART, a 2208 in UART, or the 2130s in SPI, you can come down here and just define the monitor status, and that will return useful information to you. The other thing that's worth noting is right above this section, if you're not using a 24 volt power supply, drop it down to 12 volt for your chop timing. One thing that I will warn you of is the stealth chop. So spread cycle versus stealth chop is awesome, but if you look into the hybrid, so just type hybrid, you'll see define hybrid threshold. If you enable that, your printer will be loud when it homes or when you're doing extrusions for changing filament, and that's because you're switching out of that nice stealth chop to spread cycle. I leave hybrid off. It's fine. We're good. It's not going to hurt your printer, so don't worry about, for me, I don't worry about hybrid threshold, and I really don't think anybody really needs to use it unless you're doing something really, really fast, and in which case you might want to look at turning that on so that the hybrid threshold actually kicks in and you get more torque when you're going faster. All right, so that's about all the configuration we need to do. We can hit compile again, it'll run for a while, and then we can throw the config on the board, and that's it. So like I said, we're going to have another video coming out real soon about getting that Z offset from your nozzle just right. I do want to throw it out there though. Would the E3 mini board be better than the SKR 1.3? They're both SKR boards, they're both Big Tree Tech. What do I like? I like the 1.3, and I'll probably get a 1.4 in the future here now that they're out. But why do I like the 1.3? Well, it's a bit bigger of a processor, it's a bit faster, it has a bit more memory, yes, but I like the dip pins on them. The dip is absolutely an awesome feature. If you accidentally torque your bed too fast and blow a driver, or something happens where you need to just replace one thing, you're not throwing out a whole board. The cost difference is so nominal. I would pick a 1.3. In fact, that CR10, that Ender 3, the SX4 all have 2208s or 2209s in a 1.3, and well, BLtouches. So there you have it. That's what I would use. I would definitely go with the 1.3 over an E3 Mini. So we've reached the end. You guys are great. Thanks so much for subscribing and following Greg and I along this journey. We hope to produce a whole lot more content for you coming up in the new year, and we still have a few videos left. We're going to look to squeeze in a live stream, so stay tuned to our Facebook page or the discussion tab on the YouTube page right now. We're hoping to get that community unlocked now that you guys are awesome and we have 1,000+ subscribers. We're just over 1,000. Hey, thanks a lot. If you like what you're seeing, hit that like button, hit subscribe, even ring that bell for notifications. Until next time, have a good one.